was, on a kind of weird working holiday. Anyone else would have jumped at the chance to relax and sightsee on the company dime. Her boss had all but encouraged her to try to have a good time while she was searching for De Beers. But for Sarah, it was impossible to relax while she was on a case. She wouldn't be able to enjoy herself here in Scotland until De Beers was safely in custody, his stolen diamonds returned. Maybe then she'd be able to enjoy the scenery. But until then... Sarah was beginning to lose track of how many castles they'd visited. This next one apparently was distinctive because of how well preserved its lower levels were. The upper levels were seriously damaged as a result of its placement on the edge of a cliff. The salt air and sea wind had all but destroyed it. But the labyrinthine basements, their guide informed them, were remarkably intact. She'd sat forward at that information, intrigued not by the historical significance, but by thoughts of her jewel thief. Were the well-preserved basements of Castle Dunscaith where he'd chosen to stash his prize? Well, she'd find out soon enough. They'd be pulling up to the castle in an hour or so, with just enough of the afternoon sun left to explore thoroughly before heading to their nearby hotel for the night. Sarah flipped through her notebook, written in her own chicken-scratch handwriting, and, for good measure, with a simple cipher over the top, so that anybody glancing over her shoulders at her notes would see only gibberish. She'd done her best to keep to herself on the trip, mostly, despite the earnest attempts of the tour guide to get them all to make friends with each other. But the other tourists were nosy, and she didn't want any of them finding out what she was actually doing. The last thing she needed was a dozen other people searching for diamonds along with her. Being a private detective had never been her plan. As a young woman, she'd wanted to follow in her mother and father's footsteps, to be a cop like them, like their parents before them, and their parents before them. Both of her older brothers went off to the academy when she was still in high school, and she'd been determined to join them. Little did she know that the asthma inhaler she carried with her everywhere she went would be her undoing. To her utter dismay, despite acing the entrance exam and nailing all the fitness requirements, it was her routine medical check that had sealed her fate. Had her asthma been minimal, maybe she'd have been fine. But hers was severe, unfortunately. "But I have medicine," she said to her mother over and over, sitting at the kitchen table with tears streaming down her cheeks and dripping onto the rejection letter. "My inhaler. I'm fine. My attacks aren't that bad." She knew it was a lie. Her attacks were nearly always life-threatening when they happened, usually triggered by smog and toxins in the air, things hard to avoid in the city. She had plunged into a long, deep depression then. It had been months before she felt well enough to get out of bed, to find a new life to replace the one that had been taken from her. Maybe she was still hanging on to some of that resentment, even more than 15 years later. She'd certainly become a rather single-minded kind of detective. Her boss commended her regularly on her work ethic. She was like a bulldog, never letting go of a case until she had her suspect. And having family on the police force was handy too. Her older brothers were always willing to do what they could to help her out with her work. It still wasn't what she'd spent her whole childhood dreaming of. The blue uniform, the brotherhood of the police force, the knowledge that she was keeping the city she loved safe. But sometimes you just didn't get what you wanted in life. Wasn't that true? So she focused on one case at a time, taking solace in the fact that she was still getting criminals off the street, just in a different way. And she was proud of her work, proud of her career, proud of what she'd managed to achieve, despite the asthma that still troubled her regularly. Automatically, she reached into her pocket to take a quick puff on her inhaler. Being out in the countryside like this had been good for her, actually. She'd found herself needing the inhaler far less. But still, better safe than sorry. They were about to reach Dunscaith, and the last thing she needed was an asthma attack, especially if this was where her nemesis had stashed his stolen jewels. Her nemesis. It felt stupid.